And everybody kind of hang loose a second. Barbara?
Thank you. The bell has rung and it's November 24th, and I welcome you to the Rotary E-Club of World Peace. I happen to be the honorary president and I love it. I add that on everything I do. I tell everybody Rotary E-Club of World Peace. And I just signed up for Anne's event that she's going to be hosting or working with on Saturday. And they said, what is the name of your Rotary Club? And I just typed it right in. So be sure you do that. Let people know where you are a member of the Rotary E-Club of World Peace. And there's so many wonderful things that are happening. I have a little sad news. One of our community heroes at the 2020 Peace Conference just recently passed away on Sunday. And we just couldn't believe it. She was only 84, Barbara Tellefson, who started the Unity Shop in Santa Barbara, and she must be feeding thousands of people a week now. The beautiful Barbara Tellefson. Because so many people have lost their jobs, lost their income, and the lines are around the block. That woman has started something that really made a difference. And when I got the call today, they said, we're so grateful that you honored her at the 2020 World Peace Conference. They're going to use some of the footage from the Peace Prize that you gave her this year also, Barbara. You made her life really beautiful at the end, and I was so glad that we honored her. And people say, why do you give people prizes? Because we're reassuring people that we want others to know about what they're doing. That's why we do these prizes and give people honors. Honors aren't necessarily for the person that got it. They're more for the people who are learning about that person, finding out what they did, their passion for peace or something that they're doing in their life. So with that, I just kind of was sad today because we lost one of our heroes. Kenny Loggins was her very best friend, and at the Peace Prize dinner, or we didn't have a dinner because we couldn't do that, but at the end of our event, Kenny Loggins and Jackson Gillies sang a special song to her. So she was honored. And she kind of knew she was going to go. I don't know how she did, but anyway, God bless her. And thank you for Rudy for having that great piece, for thinking up that idea of having community heroes. It really does work. And so without further ado, Rudy, would you like to welcome this illustrious group of fabulous Rotarians and friends?
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks, Barbara,
You're welcome.
for mentioning that. Karen's over here by the lake. Jim, great to have Jim on with us. We've got a great connection here from Colorado, and it's always great to see Jim. Ann is going to save us from nuclear disaster, and so Ann, keep pushing that hard. Great to see you tonight, Carol. And we'll have more information coming out on her December 15th event. And Carol, thank you for your great work that you're doing out there and working with our youth out there. Great work. Greg, great to see you. You're in your normal position there. You got a new haircut, I see.
That's good, Rudy.
He put polish on the right side this time. Sala, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Yeah, Tom tried to join us last night. He was a day early, but in COVID-19, we never know what day of the week it is anyway. So Tom, great to have you on with us. Randy will be introducing him in a second here. Andrea, great to see you. You're in Arizona right now, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm working with matchinggrants.org, putting our grant on. And so if anybody knows how to work that, I've got my email up there.
Oh yeah, connect with me tomorrow if you would.
Okay, it's a peace grant.
Okay, yeah, connect with me. I'll help you with that. Derek, good to see you. Derek's about ready to head to Belgium. Jack, glad that you're not going to have surgery.
Yeah, me too.
So that's a plus.
Always is.
And Peggy, great to see you. And I sent out Peggy's note to everybody. Hopefully they got about Giving Tuesday and giving to the Rotary Foundation. Yeah. Lisa, great to see you tonight. Hi, Lisa.
Oh, sorry. I thought you could Joyce.
Yeah, Adam's muted right now, but he's this time of year, as every time of year, working with Oxfam and those folks in need out there. He's doing great work out there. Al, great to see you. And Al, we'll keep your wife in our thoughts and prayers.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Rapidly heal there.
Yep. Thank you.
Denise, how are you? You're good. Arthur is,
Having dinner.
there he is.
Yeah.
Arthur's out there. I got another Denise. We have two Denise. We
We
have
have,
one.
I see we have well, I'll turn it this way. I had a note I see in the text box asking about our upcoming PBS show, and due to COVID, they had to shut down the station where they upload it to the satellite. So they postponed it, which turned out to be a great thing because now we have, thanks to Al's donation and others, we got a station relations rep who can get us on the World Channel in April. So the release of our film on public broadcasting has been postponed to April. They say it's going to be a much bigger month, Earth Month, and they're looking for programming on the Earth. So everything's good. Every time there's a blockage and something goes wrong, it actually turns out for the good.
Yeah.
So thank you.
You got to look for the good and the bad. So that's good stuff. We have Denise from the Conifer Rotary Club out there in Colorado. Denise, great to see you.
Hi.
Good to see you. Sam is, Sam, are you in the Boulder Club? Yeah, Boulder, Colorado Club. Great to see you. They're in support here of Randy tonight. Brian, you're keeping everything peaceful in Ojai. Good stuff there. And his grandson looks like a mini of Brian.
Okay.
Catherine, good to see you down under in Tomorrowland. Kanati got us tonight's speaker, and doing great work out there in Colorado. Lori, great to see you. Who we got else we got on here? We got quite a group here tonight. Let's see. Make sure I don't miss anybody. Bob, how's everything in Cathedral City? Looking good. Terry,
Busy.
taking care of the desert up there, high desert.
Yep. Low desert.
There, low desert. Okay. Tim, how are you? Iowa's standing strong. Mary Jo, how are you tonight?
Leave it another day.
Good. Dennis, keeping Connecticut straight. Another Connecticut Yankee out there. So Warren, how are you?
We're great. Somebody's not muted and talking in the background.
Yeah. We'll make sure they're all muted here in a second. Anya, how are you?
Great. Great. Nice to be here.
Great. We're looking forward to our next meeting with our Russian brothers and sisters. Good stuff. Marilyn, how are you?
All's well in Oakland.
There you go. Sharon, great to see you tonight.
Good to see you and all of you.
Mark, keep it dark over there in the early hours of the morning in Israel.
Shalom from Israel, right?
How's Marilyn?
Everybody's great. She's sleeping.
Oh, there you go.
4:30 in the morning here.
That's probably best to let her sleep. Yeah, how are you? I think Yeah is on here. And that's kind of where we are.
I'm doing wonderful. How's everybody else?
We're doing great.
Thank God.
It's a this week, I guess more than ever before, we need to look at I'm gonna mute. Yeah, there, so I don't get feedback. Where'd we go? There we go. As we go into Thanksgiving here in the U.S., think of those things that we can still be thankful for. Obviously, we have COVID-19 taking on our country and around the world here, and other opportunities out there. But at the same time, we have things that create peace in our lives. Even though we may not be able to get together with our family, we can connect with a phone call or on a Zoom call. Other ways to connect, to stay connected with our families, and we will come out of this. Vaccines are becoming closer every day, it seems like, and so just please stay safe, stay well, and we all count our blessings every day that we have an opportunity to be here on the planet. And tonight we have with us, and Kanati recommended our speaker for tonight. Our speaker tonight is a lawyer. He's a mediator, and he's mediated over 2,000 complex disputes with major organizations. but he loves peace building. For 9 years, from 2002 to 11, he worked over in Croatia, working on leadership training there, workshops, and he also has done work, I think, for almost 7 years over in Sudan, Darfur, South Sudan, and he's worked in other places here. He's a member of the Boulder Rotary Club, a member of the Rotary Action Group for Peace. And he's on the Peace Building Committee in his district. He must have got married very early because he's supposedly married 47 years, but he's only 50 years old. So I don't know how that worked out. But he and his wife have 2 daughters, 7 grandchildren. So I know this is those are special things in your life. And tonight we're going to have opportunity here for Randy Butler to speak to us tonight. And Randy, take it away.
Well, thank you, Rudy. And what a privilege and an honor to be invited to speak to you tonight, particularly since as I understand it, I'm going to be talking to a lot of peers and people who have dedicated a good bit of their lives in peace building. So I'll also admit to a little bit of fear and trepidation in being invited to speak to so many accomplished folks. So let me share my screen. And I've got a keynote presentation. And my son-in-law told me how to do this to make sure it actually works. So let's see. How did we do?
Did well.
Okay. So I'm entitling what I'm talking about. When you're asked to talk to a lot of people who know a lot about peace building anyway, the best you can do is to say, well, let me tell you a little bit about my experience and some of the things that I've learned. So I've entitled it Lessons from the Road in Peace Building. And as Rudy talked about already, I started off as a trial lawyer at Fulbright and Jaworski in Houston. And in 1989, got an order in my inbox basically saying, in fact, when I read it as you are hereby ordered to take the XYZ case to meditation on such and such a date. And I kind of sat back and thought, meditation? I couldn't have read that right. So I read it again and it said mediation. And I thought, wow, can he make me do this? And so I was the first lawyer in my section to take a case to mediation. I went into it kicking and screaming, and I came out saying, this process makes a lot more sense than what I have to do to people in the courtroom. So 6 years later, I decided to get trained as a mediator because I couldn't get it out of my mind because it just made so much more sense for resolving conflict. And driving home to Houston from San Antonio, one of the things that as I was reflecting on the training that really hit me hard was that the principles that inform this process have much wider application. And that's what I became very interested in. I loved mediation. I loved being, and I eventually became a full-time mediator and quit my trial practice. But what really captured my imagination was that there are bound to be principles that inform this process that could have much wider application than just resolving lawsuits. And so that really is where I began what's taken the rest of my life as a pursuit to learn more about how to build what I came to understand as sustainable peace. And of course, our friends at IAP call positive peace. And now it doesn't want to let me change. There we go. So in the summer of 2000, I had the opportunity to lead a group from Houston on a trip to Ireland and Northern Ireland. And we were there to meet with folks and learn more about the peacemaking process that had led very shortly before to the Good Friday Accords. And it was while I was there that I heard the story from someone who was actively involved in the process of what he considered to be the key breakthrough in the secret talks that ultimately led to the Good Friday Accords. And the story went like this. The breakthrough did not occur in one of the dialogue sessions or one of the formal processes. It actually took place during a coffee break when the IRA leader it was talking to the Protestant leader, and one of them pulled his wallet out, both being grandparents, and started showing the other guy photos of his grandchildren. And of course, what does any self-respecting grandparent do when somebody else starts showing photographs of their grandkids? The other guy, of course, pulled out his photographs, just like I would have. And then they didn't remember which one of them suddenly stopped and said, "Oh my God, this is it. This is our common ground. Here we are, both grandparents with grandkids, and we desperately want them to grow up in a Northern Ireland that is different from ours." Okay, by the way, I'm getting some feedback on what I'm saying. And that was the beginning, because they said suddenly they found themselves no longer standing across the table from each other, but at least in my imagination, standing shoulder to shoulder, looking together at building a different future. And as John Paul Lederach would say, they had activated their moral imagination to consider a different future, and for God's sakes, a different future than the one they wanted their grandkids to grow up in a Northern Ireland that was different from the one they created. And so the insight I took from that conversation was that maybe one of the key elements in peace building and bringing people together for conflict transformation is to find ways to create opportunities for that kind of empathic connection. In 2002, I had the opportunity I was invited to go to the Balkans, to a part of Croatia, which is a very special place, Gorski Kotar. It's a mountainous region near the coast. But it's also was a good place to start an indigenous peace project. This was literally started by Serbs and Croats who had been working together on refugee relief. And then when the refugees began to go home after the work that was done to resolve the formal conflict, the armed conflict, they looked at each other and said, "Well, what should we do?" And there was a young lady who had both one Serb parent, one Croat parent, who lived in Croatia, who said, "Well, I have this idea, let's do a peace project." And so they began to bring together young adults who had been identified as having leadership potential from all over the former Yugoslavia. And as you can see in this picture, this was a diverse group: Serbs, Croats, Albanians, Kosovars, Bosniaks, and by the way, even a young lady who was a Palestinian, because word had gotten out about the project. And so this project for me, I sort of look at it as, yeah, they asked me to be a co-leader of it, but I felt like it did more for me than I did for them. I grew dramatically. For example, it was the first time that I've ever actually engaged with a Muslim in any kind of conversation. But it was also the place where it gave us an opportunity to work for an entire week with these young people living together in this mountain lodge that you can see in the background with the blue roof. This project literally went on for 3 weeks at a time. And these young people lived together for 3 weeks and participated in programming that started right after breakfast in the morning and generally went till 8 o'clock at night. And the first week was spent focused on building relationships, and in particular on creating opportunities for empathy. And so one of the ways, for example, we would do that, particularly as it relates to empathy, is we would take them on a hike through this mountainous region, and we would call it an empathy walk. And the idea of the empathy walk was find the person in the room that is the most different from you, and then share your life story. And if you have a hard time, if you need some kind of framework for that, think of it in terms of high times, low times, family of origin, and when did you first experience some kind of transcendence in your life that helped you understand that there's more going on out there than just you. It was also at that project, it was in 2004, that because of another conflict that I was involved in Houston, I was encouraged to read a book by William Isaacs that I highly recommend, Dialogue and the Art of Thinking Together. Bill Isaacs was part of that amazing group at MIT that welcomed David Bohm to MIT decades ago. And David Bohm been the great, at that time, one of the preeminent physicists in the world, but he had become very interested in dialogue and as an emergent process. And so this book by William Isaacs, in fact, okay, I may be sharing too much information, but literally I was reading this book, soaking in a bathtub, and suddenly I started hooting and hollering, and my wife shouted out, "What are you doing in there?" And I said, "I've just figured it out. This thing we're doing in the Balkans, it's a dialogue project." And I don't know if you've ever done something like this intuitively, where you knew, but you just didn't have the words. You weren't able to frame it in a way that you could transfer how to do it to someone else. Well, this book gave me the opportunity to do that. And so I want to share some of that with you, of what it was we shared with them. And so as you can see, the diagram on the screen, we have these continuums from non-reflective at one extreme to reflective at the other. And then I always forget which is the X and the Y axis, but the other axis is the primacy of the whole, and at the other side, primacy of the parts. And what that creates for us is these four areas of conversation, four types of conversation that we can find ourselves in or relating to people, these four sectors. And sector one is characterized by politeness. This is one of those where, and this happens in every organization, it goes through, it spends a good bit of time here, which is there are just certain things that we're not supposed to bring up. So don't talk about that because it might create conflict. And of course, what we also know is that there's no way you can stay in sector one for very long if you actually are doing business together and trying to accomplish anything. At some point, you're going to end up in breakdown in the system. And the third quadrant is characterized by, it's called inquiry, and it's characterized by reflective dialogue. And then the fourth is characterized by flow and presencing and generative dialogue. So, the process for getting there is you never jump from quadrant one to quadrant four. You have to grow through these other quadrants. So it's probably worthwhile, particularly in the day and age we're living in, not only outside of the United States, but in the United States, to think in terms of, well, what is that about? What is this breakdown in the system? What does it look like? And it's typified, of course, by fight, flight, or freeze responses to conflict. It's very reactive behavior, emotional responses, distrust and fear. Does any of this sound familiar? And at best, you might be able to involve yourself in a skillful discussion where you somehow avoid the minefields, but it's more likely that it's going to be characterized by debate, which of course is always a win-lose approach to conversation. And at worst, it's about exclusionary behaviors. And those behaviors can include, forced assimilation. Okay, you'll be okay as long as you become one of us and believe what we believe, adopt our belief systems. If that won't work, then it's characterized by domination for those who are weaker, who are less affluent, who don't have a voice, and by abandonment. Like there's some people in our society, we can just ignore them. We don't have to do anything with them because they're no threat to us. And ultimately, of course, as we've seen in so many of these terrible conflict zones, it's characterized by annihilation. Well, if you won't assimilate and I can't control you and I can't just ignore you, then I guess I'm going to have to get rid of you. And in the place where we were in the Balkans, there were still 2.1 million people internally displaced in 2002 when I first started working in that process. And of course, Sudan, South Sudan, and Darfur are notorious for the genocides that have occurred there. So what do we do to get out of it? Well, it starts with some kind of mindfulness, but it requires understanding that what we all do is operate out of mental models all the time. And it's a good thing. You know, it's a shortcut for our brains so that we instantly know. When I walk out to the car, I don't have to figure out how to open the car. I just pull my key out because I've done it so many times. But of course, there are some mental models that are terrible. And this is where I will have to confess, I was raised in a home in Texas, in Houston, that was racist. And so I had some terrible mental models to overcome as I left home to go to college and start my career. But it started with awareness that they were there, and that those mental models lead us to react to stimulus, to whatever, you know, life throws at us. And usually we react by reenacting the past, by living out of those mental models. And it's often typified by fight, flight, or as some now say, freeze. So what do we do about it? Well, between stimulus and response, as Stephen Covey wrote in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, there's a space. And in that space is the power to choose. And of course, he got it from Viktor Frankl, the great psychiatrist, who, you know, in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, literally said, you know, that one of the things he learned in the concentration camp was that they could take away his food, his freedom, his comfort. They could cause him pain. They could even take his life. But the one thing they could not take away from him was his power to choose his response. And so I tried to find a way to, particularly working with young adults in this experiential learning workshop, to describe that space. And so I always precede this by asking, how many of you have been on the, you know, ridden the tube in London? And what's the last thing you hear before the door opens? And of course, someone always at the back of the room will say with their best Cockney accent, mind the gap. And I said, that's what I want you to learn how to do, is mind the gap. Take that little bit of extra time to understand that that space is there and that you don't have to immediately go to the reaction that is all too often the case. So, so how about some minding the gap practices that also help us to engage in constructive conversation? So one of the things we taught and even gave the opportunity to participate in all of these projects is the concept of generous listening. And that begins with giving people the opportunity to let you know who they are as a person, and not just as an opponent, a different identity, but you really get to know them as human beings. And then the next, which I'm particularly thankful for William Isaacs for this concept, is the concept of suspending. Because if you think about it, anytime you hear someone talking, it's almost inevitable that you will find yourself listening and then saying, I think I may disagree. And then you quit listening and start thinking about how you're going to respond. And so that brings you to a choice point. And Isaac said, in that choice point, you have the opportunity to choose either defend, which means insisting on remaining absolute in your certainty, or suspend and relax your grip on certainty. And one of the things, working particularly with people who have been involved in very severe identity conflicts, that I've tried to do is to help people understand that relaxing your grip on identity, I don't know if you can see my hand now, it means that you open up, you know, you relax your grip, but it doesn't mean you turn your hand upside down and pour out everything you ever believed and just make it all go away. All you're doing is relaxing your grip on certainty enough to be able to listen to another point of view and to be able to understand that somebody else might have a different perspective. And oh, by the way, having just come out of yet another very contentious election, you think we might need a little bit of suspending over the next few months as we get back together. You know, of course, this year, some of us are being saved from getting together with family members who voted, you know, for someone we didn't vote for. And how many times do you dread going to those family events, right? Because you can't imagine, how could you have possibly voted for, just fill in the blank. And so what a great time to begin this practice. And that brings us then into what Isaac's called the crisis of emptiness, because in effect, there's a point as a group where you come together and move into reflective dialogue when suddenly the group begins to understand they don't have all the answers. In fact, we don't even know all the questions. And by the way, one of the advantages of being not 50 but 66 is I can actually remember a time in my life when I thought I had all the answers. That was about the time I was 30. And then by the time I was 40, life had kicked me around a little bit. And I thought, damn, I used to have all the answers. Now I realize I don't even know all the questions. So where does that take us? Well, reflective dialogue, it gives us the opportunity by suspending our thinking and relaxing our grip on certainty and really starting to listen generously to others a lot longer rather than constantly having to dive over to the answers. It gives us a chance for constructive conflict engagement. It's characterized by respect, mutual respect, because as Martin Luther King said, you know, we're all locked into this mutuality and we just don't want to recognize it. We are interconnected. It's a willingness both to learn and to contribute to the conversation. And it's about standing in the shoes of the other, which is a powerful way to begin to understand another person's point of views. And it's driven more by love for self and the other and less by fear. And it gives us eventually the ability to voice the truth from love rather from this state of fear that most of us live in. So, so having worked in the Balkans a good while, in 2006, I had the opportunity to begin working with Lost Boys of Sudan, with activists, with leaders, dissident leaders, opposition leaders from Sudan, South Sudan, and working. And by the way, because we had always vacationed at the YMCA of the Rockies, I thought, okay, one of the things about Gorski Kotar that was so cool was that nature itself helped to do some of the work. And so I thought, well, what's the place on this planet that I love the most that has the most natural beauty? And it's the Rocky Mountain National Park. So I decided to start an 8-day workshop for these Sudanese and South Sudanese leaders, and began that working with them there, because again, I thought that the natural beauty and wonder would do some of the work for us. That led 2 years later to some of those young people who had come, and some of them not so young, to convince me that you need your boots on the ground. So we want you to come to Khartoum and to Juba. And so they set up a trip for me, and asked and set up several opportunities to speak to large groups of people. It started with a press conference, which I thought was ridiculous, because I told them no one is going to come to a press conference for Randy Butler. I'm nobody. And then was surprised to see 8 microphones in front of me and several TV cameras. So let's just say, you know, if you watch TV or you read the papers, you know, they knew I was there. And I asked them, so, don't you think I ought to be flying under the radar? And they says, no, actually, we're going to put a spotlight on you because we want you to get on that airplane and go home. We don't want you to be disappeared because of the work you're doing here. But it was there in one of those presentations that I made about peace building that during the Q&A, there was a gentleman who got up and basically said, how dare you come to my country and talk about peace building and not once mention justice? And then he proceeded to tell me why he asked that question. And he said, I live in a dictatorship where the secret police can yank me out of my bed in the middle of the night and lock me away in the Goza prison, and I may never come out. And that's if I'm still alive, because they might just disappear me. And here you are talking about let's come together and make peace, and you haven't mentioned justice one time. Well, I took that very seriously and began thinking about, you know, you're right. I've been avoiding speaking out about the situation in Sudan and focusing more on dialogue and come let us reason together. and conflict transformation. What am I going to do about that? And as a result of that trip, we ended up with a special group of people who came to our next workshop in June of 2010. And one man in particular, I fell in love with. I'll just give you his first name, Ali. And he was the vice chairman of one of the major opposition parties in South Sudan and was 71 years old. And the breakfast after his arrival, I asked, I was, telling him basically, Ali, thank you for coming. And he was so, generous. He said, no, thank you. Thank you for inviting me and for having this. And I said, well, Ali, what's next for you? What are you doing after the workshop? He says, well, I have some meetings at the United Nations, and then I'm going to London where I have to live, because if I lived anymore in Sudan, they'd throw me in prison or kill me. And he said, but in about 2 months in London, we're going to have representatives of all of the opposition parties and the labor unions coming together to create a united front to bring down this dictator. So I shared that with one of my colleagues. And by the way, I did not, these workshops, I organized them, I did some of the speaking, but I always had colleagues like Mark Chupp, like Andrea Bartoli, John Montgomery of Bridgeway Capital Management and the Bridgeway Foundation, to bring a breadth of experience and scholarship into our workshop. So Mark Chupp from Case Western was there. And so I told him, says, you're not going to believe who's here from Khartoum. And I told him about Ali. And he goes, hey, yeah, I knew I should have brought that movie with me. And I said, what movie is that? He says, I'll tell you in a second. He immediately got on the telephone, called his secretary and said, there's a DVD on my credenza, and it's bringing down a dictator. So I need you to send it overnight. And here's the address. And so it arrived the next day. And because of who was in the room, we changed our schedule and showed that amazing documentary, Bringing Down a Dictator, which was about the true story of a nonviolent opposition movement in Serbia that brought down Milosevic. And after it was over with, Ali walks up to me and says, I must have a copy of this DVD. And so I went to my assistant and said, okay, we got to get him a copy of the DVD. She goes online, she discovers that not only can she get it, but she can get it in Arabic, which of course is one of the national languages of Sudan. And then she said, and Randy, you're not gonna believe this, they have training manuals for how to do it. And so I said, order it, and send it to Ali. So we did that. And I got to tell you, I didn't really hear much from them about what happened later. But as we all know, in 2019, that movement brought down the dictator. And of course, I tell you this story for a number of reasons. One, because sometimes this peace building, I don't know. I mean, I had never heard of this Bringing Down a Dictator film, but I had made a decision that we had to start taking a stance about a nonviolent resistance and talking about it openly in our peace building workshop to what was going on in Sudan. And then here's Mark Chupp saying, well, I've got a DVD to show him. And then Ali asking for it. So 9 years later, of course, I was watching with great anticipation, this great interest, what was happening there, and wondering, were any of our guys involved in this? Was this the National Front? And so I got an email in October out of the blue from one of the men who had been there. And in the email said, I hope this email finds you very well. I'm gonna have to get this out of the way. I know it's a long time since we talked to each other, but you still in our hearts and minds, just as I'm writing to express my sincere thanks and gratitude to you for your tireless efforts to support Sudanese people by building their capacities to face their challenges effectively. In fact, what happening in Sudan is one of the results of your work, as the Sudanese people were able to topple the military dictatorship regime peacefully. In spite of challenges that facing the transitional civilian-led government but we doing our best to build peace and justice as well as democracy in New Sudan. So I share that with you because frankly, I don't know about you, if you've been involved in peace building for a long time, particularly the kind I've been doing, which is capacity building, which is literally bringing folks together to transform the relationships with the hopes that they're going to learn something they can take home with them to make a difference in these conflict zones they live in. It's kind of, you know, we don't know if we've made a difference. I was asked one time by people, you know, after coming home from Croatia, said, well, Randy, how will you know you've been a success? And I said, this is generational work. I may be dead before their success as a result of these efforts. This is a new generation of leaders, and they're the ones who are going to be doing the work. So how am I doing on time, Rudy? I'm not keeping track.
You're okay for about another, 5 or 6 minutes, and then we'll open up for Q&A.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay. So, so one of the things that I also learned that I would share if there's one of the lessons along the road of peace building is not only is empathy important and finding ways to help people actually talk to each other, but also the work really needs to be done not by us who fly in like we're going to save people, but that it's done by the people themselves that we've been working with. Just as we've said before, like what happened with the nonviolent movement in Sudan, in Khartoum and in Sudan. And so I want to share another one with you. This is a dialogue happening in Nyala, Darfur. And so one of the young men that came to our workshop in 2007, who was from Darfur, but was a refugee in this country, is a guy named Mucky, Ibrahim Mucky. And we were so impressed with Mucky that after that workshop, I decided to hire him as my Sudan project manager because one, I could already tell he was an amazing networker because everyone else in the project had heard of him or knew him. And he also had, how should I put it? He was exhibiting the characteristics of servant leadership from the moment he showed up. He was one of these guys who was always looking for a way to help, even if it was just helping you pick up a heavy box. And so Bucky went to work for us in the Institute for Sustainable Peace, which was the sponsoring organization for these workshops. And in 2011, he came to me and said, well, Randy, I need to take a leave of absence. He had just become a US citizen, had his US passport. And he says, I need to go home. And I said, you're going back to Darfur? He said, yeah, I want to go back to Darfur. I'm going home to get married. Plus I haven't seen my mother in 10 years. And in the meantime, I'd received a call from Luqman Ahmed, who was I want to say was the bureau chief for BBC Arabic in DC. And Luqman grew up in the same town in Darfur as Mucky. And Luqman called to say, Randy, I've just been back to Darfur. I've been in the displacement camps in Nyala, and these people want to go home. They want to go back to El Malam, to the town that they came from. And El Malam was a special place. It's the old capital of the Darfur kingdom. It's considered by most people, particularly in the Fur tribe and the Bini Mansour tribe, to be the heart of Darfur. And he says, I think there's a real opportunity here to do some peace building. Well, I couldn't get funding. And I also got to thinking about it and thought, I don't know that I'm the right one to do this, to actually go and walk into Darfur and do this work. And so I told him that and told Mucky that. And Mucky said, well, when I go home to get married and see my mom, I'll have some conversations to learn more about what's going on in the situation, and I'll get back to you. Well, he came back and he said, by the way, I need a 4-month leave of absence. So he came back 4 months later and told me about the peace project that he led. Because what he discovered was that not only was there an opportunity, but it was wide open. So he began meeting with tribal chiefs from the Bini Mansour tribe, which was the Arab tribe that basically had run the members of the Fur tribe out of town and displaced them, and of course committed genocide against a good many of them. And so he and Luckman rented a hotel ballroom and brought all these leaders together after multiple meetings with them. And these leaders from these two tribes decided that yes, it's time for reconciliation, it's time for peace, and they created a 24-member study working group to plan the process that included rebuilding El Malam and the villages all around it. And that 24 persons was made up of 12 members of each tribe. By the way, it included the former rebel commander for the district was on this group. And they did amazing work. And they finally decided after multiple meetings to bring the people home from Nyala to El Malam. And they went out to the traditional place where disputes were resolved. And you can literally see them lined up, in the circles. And it turned out, and it worked. And this is Mucky, by the way, speaking to them. I asked him, well, Mucky, how did you do this? And he said, I just did what you guys taught me. And I talked to them in particular about forgiveness and how forgiveness has to take place in the context of forward-looking justice rather than retribution. So I tell you that to say, again, you never know how your peace building work is going to have impact. But building the capacity of young leaders like Mucky I think is crucial. And I think it needs to start with what we talked about earlier. And of course, it needs to move on to, the kind of systems approach to peace building that IEP teaches, that John Paul Lederach has written extensively about. But people also have to know how to speak to each other. And so where I want to end is with this question, because this is the question that's been going through my mind, not only about conflicts internationally, but right here in the United States. And that is, what is the underlying ethos that should inform and undergird the multifaceted work of peace building? And I'll tell you, I've become convinced, particularly going back and rereading Martin Luther King Jr., that it's an ethos of revolutionary love. And that's not love as fuzzy feelings and affection, or the kind of love when I say I love my new car. It's that fierce, relentless commitment to and labor for the good of others. It's about building the common good. And thank you for letting me take this time and share with you.
That's super. You want to stop share there, Randy?
Yeah.
There we come. Hey, great job, and thank you for your peace building work for all these years, and it saved enormous amount of lives and brought people back together. So congratulations on that, and thank you for your continued efforts in here. We have some questions here for Randy. Dennis, go ahead.
Yes, actually, I put it in the chat. Just sort of like, Rotary is a non-political entity. Yet, we're involved with how do we transform conflicts and build sustainable peace without really getting involved in political matters. And follow up in a sense, as you as a lawyer, what is the difference between being involved in policy making vis-a-vis politics, and how can one do the former and avoid the latter? That's my questions.
Yeah. Wow, Dennis, you and I have talked before, and I had a feeling when you said you had a question, it was going to be one of the really tough ones. But thank you, because I think it's an important question. I think it's a question literally I've been thinking about recently because of where we are right here in our own country. How do we come together and not talk about what needs to change and why we think it needs to change, whichever direction it needs to go. And so for some folks, that feels political, particularly if a speaker in a meeting like this makes some particular statement that reveals their own political affiliation or who they tend to vote for or whatever. And And so I think it's something that we need to work on as Rotarians, is to understand how can you do peace building and there not be some politics involved. And frankly, I was not a Rotarian, by the way, until 2 years ago. But I was feeling that as a mediator, because, you know, as a mediator, we're told you don't take positions. You're the intermediary. It's not your conflict. It's not your solution. And that's why that fella calling me out and saying, how dare you come here and not talk about justice? Well, when you start talking about justice, how does that not implicate the political system and how decisions get made? Now, at the same time, I think that what would really be great is to reform how we make those decisions. And so one of the things, you know, we don't have time tonight for me to go into great detail about, but one of the things I got to do in Houston was to partner with the Kinder Institute for Urban Research at Rice with my good friend, whose name all of a sudden just fell out of my head. And they asked me to help them put together a series of dialogues because they had just discovered that Houston is the most diverse city in America. And their concern was this could either be the worst thing that ever happened to Houston or it could be a great blessing. And so the operative question for our series of dialogues with a group of 52 leaders in Houston was, how do we ensure that Houston grows to be a diverse, united, equitable, and inclusive multi-ethnic society? What are the barriers to getting there, and what are the policy changes that will need to be undertaken in order to overcome those barriers? And I think those kinds of dialogues ought to be the ultimate goal for, and who better? In fact, where's Al? Al and I got to be on a panel not too long ago for a WASH symposium that was put on by our district here. And he brought, what was the name of that movie, Al?
Oh, yeah, the Klamath, A River Between Us.
Yeah, A River Between Us. And it was a documentary about and it was a Rotarian who got it started, who literally saw the opportunity to bring people together from both sides of this very contentious water rights issue. And in the process, built great relationships and peace. Aye.
And you talked about a breakthrough.
Yes.
One of the breakthroughs, the breakthroughs were occurring. Remember, you've got all the combatants in a room trying to work out their right answer. But the breakthroughs came over meals where they would tend to sit with the other person and they'd break bread together and they'd start to talk about the grandchildren or whatever.
Commonality, yeah.
Yep.
Jack Freelander.
Thanks, Rudy. Yeah, Randy, appreciate the presentation. In the conflict resolution techniques, strategies, literature, how is it taking into account the impact of social media and that people are getting their news from alternative realities? And so you don't have a common basis for discussion. You know, people are just immersed in one set of reality versus another set of realities that are very divorced from one another's sense of reality. So how does that handled in conflict resolution?
Well, so one, I know that there's quite a few of us studying and writing about it. Doug McAdams, for example, who's a good friend at Stanford, wrote a book recently, and he and I ended up being invited by the Shell Scenario Planning Group to be part of a scenario planning process for the state of Pennsylvania about 2 years ago. And the reason they invited me was because they originally had no idea that they even wanted me, but they decided to invite me because they discovered that frankly, they were saying the Republicans aren't talking. And here we are talking about, about the future. The scenario project was around what is the energy future of Pennsylvania and how will it affect our people? And so they ended up calling me in, and so one of the things that I had to do was to openly address this specific problem that you've brought up, Jack, because I was challenged by the head of the scenario planning group, said, since this is a scenario project, could you present 2 scenarios? And so one of those scenarios was basically, a total breakdown, and we end up in terrible conflict, or we learn how to talk to each other. And so, and therefore, one of the things I had to address was social media. And so, what I talk to people about doing is find ways not to get stuck in your channel. And so, one of the things that I've talked to them about is, for example, the flip side, which is a daily email that you can get summarizing the news from both a conservative perspective and a liberal perspective. And these are, and I read the flip side almost every day. And I mean, it's journalists from the National Review, it's journalists from Vox, it's CNN, it's Fox. And they bring it all together and address particular issues and particular things that are going on. And it's, and then we've got a lot of other organizations working on this, Better Angels, Living Room Conversations, who, by the way, have created a living room conversation around the four-way test. And
yeah.
Okay, this is a sneak preview for the district committee, but the leader of Living Room Conversations and I have basically made a deal that we're going to have a partnership with Rotary and start using some of their living room conversations. So Jim, I haven't told you about that yet, maybe, but that's in the offing.
We had that discussion, and I had asked her to create that one on the four-way test, which she did.
Yeah.
And
it's awesome.
Yeah, it is awesome. Randy, and Tim had the statement out there. But the politicians make human rights and our needs and opportunities out there political, not us. And so how do we, and I think this builds on what Dennis asked here, we stay out of the political weeds by staying down and us taking on humanitarian issues and building here. How do we do that?
Well, one of the things that I think we explored the conversation, but one of the things I would like to see us as Rotary do is enter into more dialogues internally around this, and no slam on the normal meeting process, which is we have a meeting, we have a speaker, the speaker has to be really, really good. I always worry about that part. But what we don't do is actually engage in real dialogue. And there are ways to do that. One of my favorites, for example, and that I could see our club doing, my club happens to have about 230 members. And when we meet in person, there's 120, 130 people in the room. What a great opportunity for a World Cafe dialogue. And I don't know how many of you have experienced that, but Juanita Brown and David Isaacs, who I think were out on the West Coast, were the ones who first created that process. And one of the fun things we did in Houston was I came up with the idea of what if a political campaign could be a dialogue rather than the typical debate and have the spirit of a dialogue. And so we started inviting candidates together for local and office to a World Cafe dialogue, and had them sitting at different tables. And the way World Cafe works is you do basically 15 minutes to 20 minutes at a table. The facilitator calls time and you move to a new table. And you do at least 3 rounds over the course of an evening. And so you've got the opportunity to actively engage in conversation with your fellow citizens and with these candidates for office. And who knows what might come of that. And so that's just a scratch in the surface versus literally convening the kind of conversations that Al was talking about were in that movie, of literally inviting folks. I think it takes, I think Rotary needs to decide to become how should I put it, a very courageous convener. To say I mean, think about the networks that we represent, and that we could literally bring people together, not to address a particular political issue, but literally to examine some system within our system, that works in our community and how to make it better. You know, usually
Randy,
when
I'm going to interrupt you.
Yeah, sure.
I think that's one of the most profound takeaways from this evening. Rotary International has the opportunity to be the world's convener for nonviolent conflict resolution. And the sooner they grab onto that idea, the faster we'll grow and the greater peace we will have. Because we are connected. We're connected vertically and horizontally in society, and we have the right DNA and the right heart to bring people together and to help them hear each other.
Hear,
We
hear.
really do. And so I hope you keep saying what you just said. It really struck me.
Well, thank you.
This
Well,
has been a great evening, Randy. Thank you for joining us. I know there's some other folks that might want to hang on here a few more minutes.
Hey, Rudy.
Yes.
I'd just like to compliment Al bringing the Klamath Water thing to the forefront. And that's where things can happen on a local basis. And what we have are the diversity in our membership. And a few weeks ago, we had Sharon doing a presentation on Russia. So we're dealing with global aspects. And in 1989, I was part of a group study exchange that hosted a group from Russia. And that was, you know, when they were newly coming out. That is one thing on a national or international basis. But then we have this as an example with Brian, who's one of our members. And you talk about, you don't have to do turning the world upside down. You can do things in your own neighborhood. So it doesn't have to be dramatic, but it has to be consistent.
Yes.
And Rudy, if you would ask Randy to give us a list of some of the resources that he mentioned during this presentation and then send them to us, that would be very much appreciated.
I'd be very happy to do that.
Randy, if you'll give me that list, I'll get it out to our members.
We will do that. We developed a reading list some time ago that we would share with our folks. I would love to do that.
That's super.
Rudy, and if they're not members, if they could give us their
Yeah,
email.
if those folks that want that aren't members of our club want to connect me an email with you, I'll be glad to share that with you too. This has been a great evening, Randy. Thank you for bringing us out. And Al, your comments are very central in this. I would want you to think this is Thanksgiving week. And I'm thankful for each of you, members of our club and members in Rotary and guests that have joined us tonight, because you are our family, and you mean a lot to Karen and I. And I appreciate you as friends and having changed our lives.
Rudy, not to dominate, but the Dalai Lama after the election said that America is entering a period of healing and suggested to Americans at least that they begin that process by expressing gratitude to someone other. And that could be your relative that maybe voted differently. But the point is, what you just expressed as thankfulness and gratitude for this family, Dalai Lama's behind you, guy.
I love each of you, and you mean a lot to me and our family here. And you do make a difference in the world, and you are amazing group of individuals. And Randy, thank you for your presentation tonight. And our network in Rotary is amazing. And we'll continue connecting around the planet here and creating peace in our world. And I just want to thank each of you tonight, and I'm thankful for you. And please be safe, stay well. And we look forward to seeing you next Tuesday night.
And Randy,
Yeah.
you and anybody else are welcome at any time at any of our meetings. And
Oh,
we'd
thank
love
you.
to see you again.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure to be with you.
Good. Thank you, Randy. Great. Keep up the good work. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
And shalom from the Middle East. Shalom from the Middle East.
Shalom.
Happy
Shalom.
Thanksgiving.